Hi, this is Bill McCamley, and welcome to What the Bleep Does This Mean? A podcast where we talk about something fairly complicated going on in public life in 15 minutes or less, and hopefully something you'll understand. And one of the complicated things we're going to talk about today is two words: due process. In the past few weeks, Donald Trump and officers loyal to him have rounded people up they say are gang members or terrorists or that hate Jews or whatever, putting them in jail and then sending them very quickly away, either to a country they were from or to a monstrously dark torture prison in El Salvador. Why? Well, they say that they were elected to crack down on immigration and they are moving quickly to get people out of the country that don't look like them. Let's be very honest. In the middle of April 2025, right now, Americans don't trust Trump on the economy, or Elon Musk gunning Social Security, or any of these guys on abortion. But Americans right now are generally worried about immigration and do support stricter immigration rules. So, given that, why are so many of us really worried about how this is actually playing out? Well, one of the core things that makes America great is that generally one person can't become president and then do whatever the hell they want for any reason that they want. It's one of the main reasons we fought a war against England. See, back in the day, during the American Revolution, they had this king named George, and he appointed governors and judges to the American colonies. And when someone was taken into custody by the British Army, the judges just did what they wanted with people, not based on any rules or structure, but because they and the king felt that people should be treated poorly. The original Americans hated this so much that they wrote out very specific rights into our Constitution. Specifically, the Fifth Amendment to that Constitution says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, or be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Sixth Amendment says, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury comprised of people in the state or district where the crime shall have been committed. What does due process, that thing in the Fifth Amendment, mean? Well, it's about you, your rights, and basically says if the government thinks you did something wrong, they can't just say you're guilty and put your ass in jail because they feel like it, like those old English judges were doing. First, there needs to be a law passed by Congress or your state legislature, and then signed by the president or the governor that lays out some ground rules for how you can act. Let's take something easy like speed limits. Setting one up means it needs to be passed by your state legislature and signed by the governor. This requires a ton of conversation with different people who think it should be higher or lower, and then what the penalties are that should work for that. So let's say this gets done for 70 miles an hour. Cool. Then they have to make sure you know about it, which is why they make sure you have signs all over the highway saying it's 70 miles an hour. So no one guy acting as a king or dictator can just say, you can only drive 50 miles an hour because fast cars scared me as a kid, and we're not even going to tell you about it so we can enforce it however we want. Second, once that rule is set up by a process, it needs to be enforced by another process. So let's say you're cruising on down the highway and an officer thinks you're speeding. They have to have evidence, which is why they have radar guns that measure your speed. Then they need to give you a chance to pull over so they can come up behind you with lights and sirens, come to your window and have a conversation about your ticket, and then either give you a warning or a ticket. They can't just hate your Prius or jacked up pickup because they don't like the way either of those look, run you off the road, or shoot you in the head and throw you in jail for years because they thought you were going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. Third, again, even with all of that set up, we don't think one guy out on the highway can just make a judgment, even with a radar gun. For those fellow nerds out there, this isn't Stallone and Judge Dredd saying, I am the law. If you think you weren't breaking the law or had a good reason for doing so, you can opt to go before a separate neutral judge and make your case. When you do, the officer has to be there to show evidence you were speeding. If they don't show up or couldn't prove that their equipment was working or whatever, the judge could very well say, nah, you're good. You don't have to pay the ticket. And that judge, even if they do say that you're guilty, they can't give you a punishment that is more than the law that was passed earlier allows for. And this is all in place just for speeding. Again, and I know you're tired of hearing this, but due process is important because it means one person who's having a bad day cannot determine your punishment because they don't like the way you talk or your tattoo or because you had a bumper sticker they didn't agree with. The Sixth Amendment, the one about speedy trials, it means that the government can't just keep you in jail forever before a process starts. They have to do everything they can to make sure that you get that process fairly quickly. And then they have to prove it. So, what if we don't have these rules in place? What's the alternative? You ever hear of Pussy Riot from a few years ago? They were just this Russian punk band playing things that Putin, the dictator of Russia, didn't like, because that's what punk is. So we put two of the ladies in jail for 2 fucking years in Siberia. And when they got out, they didn't stop because they believe in this stuff. They had a peaceful protest outside of prison where another dude that Putin put in jail because he didn't like the films that this guy was making was being held. So Putin put them in jail again. People here in the US have historically said this sort of thing is a bad idea, but we haven't always protected these rights. Things get scary sometimes, and human beings are tribal by nature. We tend to identify and support people that are like us and oppose people we see as on the other side of something. I mean, literally go to any sports game to see what I mean. But this shit also translates into broader public life. It's easy for us to see someone that either we don't understand or whose looks we associate with something bad and think that they shouldn't be treated with the same amount of respect as someone who looks more like we do. And before I go on, this is not me being judgmental. I do it too. It's something everyone has to work on. The worst case of us blocking due process here in the States probably happened during World War II. After the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and we entered the war, there was a real fear from most Americans about Japanese folks. And this unfortunately translated into fear of Japanese Americans. 120,000 people of Japanese descent were taken from their homes and moved from mostly California and Hawaii to camps in the desert. Two of the biggest ones were in my home state of New Mexico, in Lordsburg, out in a really rural part of the state, and up in the capital in Santa Fe. In fact, the former mayor of my hometown is named Ken Miyagishima. His father was removed from his hometown in California. Their family was told to sell all of their stuff in 48 hours, excuse me, and they only got a tiny amount of what it was worth, and they were moved to this concentration camp in Arizona. Another famous guy to be held in one of these camps, George Takei, who played the original Sulu on Star Trek. And this was straight up racist because we were also at war with Germany and Italy. And we didn't do it for the second or third generation folks from those countries. This went on for 2 years until finally the US Supreme Court said in 1944 that while the order was legal for military reasons, no loyal citizen could be held without real cause. And this paved the way for their release, and the president stopped the process the next day. This is widely seen as a really bad part of American history, a mistake. And over 40 years after, in 1988, a bill was passed in Congress and signed by President Reagan that actually granted some money to these folks because of the long-term harm they had from being wrongly imprisoned. And, interesting to note, a segregated Japanese unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, was formed from volunteers, many of whom came from these camps and fought in Europe, becoming literally the most decorated combat unit in the history of the country. If you've watched the original Captain America from a couple years ago, one of the prisoners he picks up and eventually fights with is being judged by one of his other white prisoners because he looks Japanese, and he says in the most American of accents, "I'm from Fresno, Ace." So why is all this important today? Donald Trump and his followers, who now control our government, seem to not really care about due process in their passion for getting rid of anyone they don't like. And here are some examples. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a dude from El Salvador who moved to Maryland to live with his brother and work construction. Yeah, he did cross the border illegally in 2016, but he's married to an American woman, has kids who are American citizens, has never really done anything wrong. He was arrested in 2016 as he was hanging out at a Home Depot parking lot trying to get work, and the guys he was with may have been affiliated with a gang, though none were arrested. He was taken into the police station, though, but later released. And then one of the police officers that was responsible for taking him in was asked to resign because of misconduct. This dude was picked up a few weeks ago and shipped to this torture prison dungeon in El Salvador, known for some of the harshest conditions on the planet, with beatings, torture, and starvation, before any kind of due process. People in the Trump administration have admitted twice that this was a mistake, but they refuse to bring him back. Another example is the student Rumayusa Ozturk. She's Turkish and goes to school at Tufts University in Boston. In late March, she was literally confronted on the street by masked officers in civilian clothing and forced kicking and screaming into an unmarked van before being transferred to a jail in Louisiana, where judges tend to be friendlier to Trump's view of the world. Her offense? She literally signed a letter to the Tufts University student newspaper sharing an opinion that the university shouldn't be investing in things that support Israel. Let me say that again. She signed a letter to a student newspaper and will be in jail now for over a month before she can even get a bail hearing. Now, you may be thinking, these aren't US citizens. This could never affect me. Well, think again. An American citizen, Juan Carlos Lopez Gomez, who was born in Georgia, was arrested in Florida a couple of weeks ago on a routine stop where he was heading to try and find work. He was detained in jail by federal officers even after his mother showed up in court with his birth certificate. They finally let him out, but not right away. His only crime was apparently being brown and not speaking great English. Another American citizen from my home state of New Mexico, this guy Jose Hermosillo, was kept in jail for 10 days recently by federal officers because he went for a walk in Tucson, Arizona with his girlfriend. Yeah, they finally let him out, but again, no real reason for keeping this guy. And this shows the two reasons why due process is so important. Let's say that Jose or Juan Carlos, American citizens, were treated in the same manner as Kilmar and sent to El Salvador quickly without any kind of hearing. And Trump's people refused to bring him back because even though they messed up, they didn't want to admit it. That's not good. The second reason actually comes from Joe Rogan, of all people. And I never thought I would be quoting him on this podcast, but here we are. Last week, when talking about people who may be put in jail regardless of evidence, he says, here's the problem with fuck due process. What if you are an enemy of, let's say not any current president, let's pretend we get a new president, totally new guy in 2028. And this is a common practice now of just rounding up gang members with no due process and shipping them to El Salvador. They can say, you're a gang member. You're client. No, I'm not. They say, prove it. You say, what? I got to go to court. And they say, no, no due process. A famous poem by Martin Niemöller. He was a Lutheran minister who lived through Nazi Germany in concentration camps, even though he initially supported Hitler, goes like this. First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And Trump, over the weekend, put out a post saying that he didn't want to give people trials because he thinks things would take too long. Let that sink in. And hopefully it gets you to consider where we should be going if we all don't all stand up and push back against this dictator bullshit right now. Thanks again for listening to this. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please comment on the social media post you find this on, or you can email me at whatthebleepdoesthismean@gmail.com. That's whatthebleepdoesthismean@gmail.com. Thanks again, everybody. Appreciate it. Good luck, and keep your heads up out there.